what I will say then at this juncture is that it's nice that two of you have cosplayed from Talons of Weng-Chiang. Is Jason not doing Patsy Smart? Get your teeth out, Jason, to do your review. Right. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of season 14. I can count. If you have come back after the last one. I'm P-Bal and I'm joined again by...
Hello, I'm still here, I think. James?
And hi, it's Jason again.
We had hoped that Jason would be removed due to Mary Whitehouse complaints, but...
They'll cut me out of the omnibus, honey. That's what they'll do.
I'll restore you from a VHS off air.
Oh, I might look a bit better if they did that.
In a 405 line. Last time in part 1, we scored Mask Man Drago at 25.5, Hand of Fear 22, and The Deadly Assassin 10.5. But we are onwards and upwards, and we are onto story 4, and that is the hand. Not the hand, it's the face. It's all body parts, isn't it?
The hand, the face.
The hand's face, tragedy, is the face of evil. So, Jason, are you our resident face of evil, or are we going to James?
Oh, no, I don't think that's very fair. But I also don't think Tom's got an evil face either. But here we go, still traveling alone. So he's defeated the master, who's going to live to fight another day, and we'll see him again in another season. Traveling alone, the Doctor encounters the savage Sever-Team tribe, who are at war with the Tesh. And along with that, he discovers he's a god of evil, which I think is quite the thing. So, okay, so we've had 3 relatively strong stories, from my opinion, through season 14 so far. This, for me, is probably the story that dips a little because it's not a particular favorite of mine. I think it suffers a little bit from being a studio-bound story, and it's just a little bit ploddy for me. I get the storylining behind it. You know, it's kind of interesting that the Doctor's been there before. We don't quite know when. He's obviously caused some issues while he was there the last time. But I don't know, this story's lacking something, and we'll probably flush this out as we go through it. Interesting that the Doctor breaks the 4th wall in the first episode. I always find that quite an unusual thing. While he literally talks to the camera, because he doesn't actually have a companion to talk to. I do like the idea of primitive versus technology. So again, we'll find out a little bit more about that as we come through it. And of course, it wouldn't go without me saying that this is the introduction of our next companion, the lovely Louise Jameson playing Leela. So few firsts. It's, like I said, not the best for me for the season, and we'll go from there, and I'll see what you two boys have to say about it.
I think you've said everything, Jason. We'll just go straight on to the scores. Yeah, story-wise, yeah, you've got these 2 tribes, if you like, against each other, as you say. We've got the introduction of Leela. It's weird, and I was watching this and I was thinking, based on what we know about how Tom started to be behind the scenes, sort of through this season, some of this, some of the arguments he had, it must have been a great pitch to say, right, we're going to have your face carved on a mountain. We're going to go in through your mouth. We're going to have these creatures that are, basically your face attacking people. It's a really strange concept, but it's an odd story, and one which is, it doesn't set the world alight, but it's nice enough to introduce Leela as the companion, although originally there was 2 endings, one where Leela stayed and one where Leela got inside the TARDIS. So it's kind of like, were they still hedging their bets as to what was going to happen? But as we discussed in our last review, I think the Doctor's better for having a companion. And you're right, he does that, breaks the fourth wall, because there's no companion there to talk to about what's going on or what's happening.
That thing that they wanted Twiggy, didn't they? They wanted Twiggy to be a Victorian urchin. She's never going to do that, was she?
Oh, that was never going to happen, was it?
Our own Rose, though. Anyway, do you know what? The face people for me, it's funny because I said in the last one, I could willingly just skip straight and pretend that Deadly Assassin never happened. I'd sort of like to think the face of evil didn't happen either, because it's bloody dreary. I mean, I sort of forget I'm watching it whilst I'm watching it. And do you know, the biggest surprise to me in that sense is that Chris Boucher wrote this, and he writes the next story, and you sort of can't imagine that the same person is responsible for the two.
But
he whizzed through the script on this one and put the effort into the next one, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think the it's interesting because as soon as Doctor Who sort of gets into that tribe thing where everyone's just sort of walking around looking awkward and topless, and it's all a bit kind of like, it is your tribe of gum, kind of dreary. I find it intensely boring. I want something that's going to engage me, that's going to entertain me. And Space People doesn't do that. I don't know what the good. I mean, David Garfield is a great actor, but he's basically having to just do Mad with a cricket glove on his head, and it's not helping him. It's nothing to get from it.
No, I agree with you. I mean, Pennant Roberts is he's really having to work hard to get some life into this story, in my opinion. And you know, there's a moderate, you know, there's not a, you know, it's not a bad guest cast list sitting alongside this. But I think you're right. It suffers from that whole tribe of gum thing where people are a bit awkward and they don't really know quite how to respond. And there's a lot of CSO in this story as well. And there's it's a little bit of the computer stuff, and it does. I agree. I'm going to struggle to find nice things to say about the story. But I'm gonna. I don't know. I'm with you. I think it just lacks. It's lacking something. This story. I just don't see it.
I like the idea that the Doctor is coming across something which he has caused himself. I like that idea because, you know, a lot of the Doctor Who stories, he saves the day and then dashes off, and you know, later on, particularly in the books, it starts to talk about the consequences of the Doctor's actions, and you know, he might have saved the day, but he left a lot of damage behind. And so I like the fact that this is something where he's already intervened, thought he'd fixed it, and then, you know, went off.
But interestingly, though, James, there's no real explanation in the story as to when he's done this. Yeah, if you read the novelization, the target
in the novel, it suggests it was at the very beginning of his regeneration,
and it strikes
during Greybot.
Because the TARDIS doesn't actually leave; it goes to materialize, but doesn't actually materialize. So I'm not entirely sure the target novelization gives me a good explanation as to how he's managed to do this.
I think in that fraction of a second where the TARDIS, you know, dematerializes but doesn't go anywhere, there was about 20 Big Finish stories, so it probably fits in somewhere there. But yeah, the idea in the novel, it suggested that he nipped off, fixed his computer, and then went back to Robot. But there's, you know, who knows?
Yeah, my Doctor Who theory on if you've got Pam Salem in it, it's going to be perfection. I'm sticking to that because she's only a voice in this. So I think there's mitigation. She might not have known the terror that was around it. I don't know. It feels slightly more like it belongs at the tail end of season 15. It's got that kind of dull cheapness to it that it's just on.
It does have a Graham Williams feel, doesn't it?
I know. No, whoa. We're not having that as an answer there. What we're going to say is it feels like it could be towards the tail end of the next season, not that it's a Graham Williams story. It would be some of the best Doctor Who's, but I'm that. Yeah. Stop the Matrix. Yeah, see, that's not happening, no.
All right.
I was going to say, it is more... Sorry, I was going to say, based after the last story, it is more back towards traditional Doctor Who stories, whereas the last one was like the Gallifrey, textbook. This is more the Doctor lands and, solves an issue between two tribes. I think it's quite a well-used plot that, the two tribes are basically descended from, a spaceship. We've seen that so many times before, and it's not as well done as times that we've seen it done before as well. So, I think it feels lackluster from that perspective. There's not a great deal of anything new or anything that, exciting.
The interesting thing about this story actually is normally there's something that you pull out as your image, isn't there? It's the mask, you've got the mask and Hand of Fears, there's the hand, Deadly Assassin, there's the master. Whenever there is a release, and one of the best, it's Jeff Cummings, isn't it? Talkin. Whenever you pull out a thing for this story, it's Leela. There's a picture of Leela, so it's Leela's story. But there isn't like an iconic, you have invisible things in this, don't you? Which is obviously a very cheap way around how to design anything. And the strange, the Tesh and all that. But there isn't an iconic element to it. So if you are doing a DVD cover or a book cover or something, you instantly, that's Leela, isn't you? Because that's the only sort of new or unusual thing that you can pull out on the story. And if just the introduction of a character is where you're at on it, it's a bit naff, really. I mean, where are we at on Leela? Do we think she makes a good debut? Do we think she's a good companion for the Doctor? Where are we at on the Leela front?
I like Leela as a companion. I think she does slowly develop, and there are better stories than this with Leela, indefinitely. I think her introduction, her father gets killed in the first scene, basically. The story starts where she's being accused of, defying the gods. The father does the test and dies. So we have Leela as an orphan already before the Doctor arrives. And then she sort of, even at the end, she just runs towards the TARDIS. She's like, "Oh, I'm coming with you." So I don't think it's the strongest first episode for a companion. She certainly, is different again. She's quite fearless. She's quite capable of killing someone, or taking them out. So I think there is an element that you see a different side to the typical companion role. But I don't know whether the actual story itself is a great platform for saying, here's a fantastic new companion.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, I'm not convinced the story needs to be the platform for it, because obviously if you're becoming the new companion, if you look back to something like the War Machines, with the introduction of Ben and Polly, they're not really, they're in the story, but I wouldn't say that's a great platform for them. They don't really come into their own really until the Smugglers, when they're on board. And I think that's the same that can be said for any companion that's coming into the series. I've always struggled just a little bit with the companion Leela. There is a little bit of an Eliza Doolittle thing going on here, where she's going to learn lots of new things, and becomes potentially less of the savage as she comes through her tenure on the show. I find the character, I wouldn't have naturally have said that the character of Leela would make a good companion for the Doctor, because I've said before, some of the best companions, I've never been a fan of having a companion that's on an equal level to the Doctor, because I don't think they work necessarily. But I feel that you need some middle ground in there, and I think taking the character of a savage on board the TARDIS, albeit he didn't, because she obviously ran into the TARDIS and pressed the buttons and off we went. I just don't know. I personally not entirely bought into the concept of the companion here.
It's interesting that Philip has said that the idea was to make the companion more of a feminist role model. I'd argue that Sarah Jane actually is very assertive. She's got a career. She's, I don't think that Sarah is like some kind of anti-feminist model, but his thing is that he wanted Leela to be feminist role model. But in some ways, especially in this first story, and it is Weedle Block, they do that by making her incredibly violent. So she's not assertive so much as murderous. And I don't know if that's necessarily great. And then by the same token, she's taught by the Doctor. So she's got her instincts and her savagery and all that stuff. But what she's learning is to become a reasoned human. But she's learning that from the Doctor. So I don't necessarily think this notion of her as being a feminist role model is it's slightly flawed in some ways. But what I would say on the other hand is that I was like, I'm not too sure about Leela's companion. I was watching it with Dex the other day, and he's like, but what she has got is she's got an action to her, and she's got an attack, and she's got a driving force. She will drive the narrative forward. So for better or for worse, she will go in at it at a certain point. And whether that makes her a role model, but it doesn't necessarily, but it does mean she will drive the narrative forward because she will have an idea of what she wants to do. She is independent. She might not be right, but she is independent and she's assertive. So I suppose to that degree, she is a dynamic sort of role model, but then she's not really a role model. You won't want to say, my niece loves you. She knifed her bully at school the other day because she loves Leela. I mean, you wouldn't do this now. You totally wouldn't bring a character into a series like Doctor Who where they're carrying a knife and their answer to dealing with situations is to kill someone. It's quite I mean, as we will say as we come through this end video, things are sometimes of the eras in which they are born. And I think this Leela especially, I think Leela is probably one of the most dated characters in that sense, in that you wouldn't have a violent, I mean, I suppose later on Sophie Zace is quite big with her bombs. It's just not something you would do now. You would never have that as your companion. You wouldn't have a proactive companion role model who was as violent as Leela is.
And I think she would have had a challenge as well, following on from Liz Sladen's performance as Sarah. I think Louise Jameson's more than capable of carrying the role, and I think she did a great job. And I'm absolutely not saying anything here, but somehow the character doesn't just quite fit. Tom at the time was clearly wanting the show to be around him, and I think Louise has gone on record at the BFI actually a while back when they did the Talon screening, and I think she's on record there as saying, her start on the show and her time on the show wasn't at times the easiest for her because Tom was quite difficult to work with, and I think he wanted the show. He didn't really want a companion, and therefore I think there was that little bit of a resentment there, possibly. She'll tell the story better than I can. But, I don't think the time on the show was the easiest either. So the character itself potentially, grows. And I kind of like where they do take Leela eventually by the time she sort of does leave. But I don't think it was an easy time for her on the show.
No, I think maybe it's knowing it shows. If that makes Tom isn't playing to her a lot of it. There isn't a chemistry in a friendly. There isn't a sort of. He doesn't feel like he's friends with Leela. He doesn't feel like he necessarily wants her along. She's there and he's cordial, and I think that comes through from the character and the performance. I mean, obviously, Mary comes in, and I think he's sort of in awe of Mary. I mean, he would be, and I think that lives. And then obviously Lala. I mean, he obviously liked her a little bit. So I think things change as things move on. But I think you can tell that there's a sort of friction that he's not sure about this. I mean, to be honest with you, in ego terms, you would also be thinking about, actually, I'm doing this, I'm in a staff, and what's it? And she's got a lot more on show than I have. Am I being upstaged here? Tom would not have wanted to have been upstaged. But in truth, I think Louise's performance in these three stories, actually, are her best performances in the series, because it's a very instinctive, it's a very fresh. You can feel that she's got an attack to it that I think is sort of dampened by the time it comes back for the next season. I think these three, you can definitely feel that there's an appetite for it, and there's a freshness and some very nice delivery on lots of bits of it. They're very unusual and very instinctive, I think. And I just wonder whether it might have, for Leela as a character, would have been nice to just have had maybe a 3-4 story arc and off. Maybe what she becomes in the next season, as it sort of mutes it. The character isn't. Yes, there's the arc that she now doesn't want to kill people, but what she becomes is a sort of bit of a siphon of this sort of energy that I think you get from her in these 3 stories.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I saw in a documentary that her character was to attract the male population into watching, is to get the dads watching the show in her costume, to begin with. But a character does go through a progression, like you say, in the next 3 stories, more so than in the rest of the time that she's on the show. The Leela you have here, I can see a difference between the Leela that's in Talons. It's it's much more distinct, but then we kind of, the stories where it almost goes backwards.
My costume used to be to get the dads in, and I got told off for it. So.
That's why you're looking very businessman-like.
He is looking very sharp tonight.
I think it's no disrespect, and I think obviously she's very talented. She does a great job on it, and I think maybe it's the thing with successive writers as it comes into it. It's the easy default to go back to what you need for the narrative then rather than what the character is. But I suppose there's not a world of difference in some ways between Leela and Katerina, is there? I mean, there is that sort of thing of, you've got your limitations within what you can do with them, and at some point you have to modify them. Otherwise, you can't get a story. You can't do it. She'd be killing everyone. It would, I mean, it'd be like Earth shock every week, wouldn't it? So I think we've talked more about Leela than the face of evil, which I might think is a sign. So are we going to go to scores on Doctor Who? And if they were going to go the day God went mad, I'd have loved that on all the target spines. Can you imagine Doctor Who and the day God went mad? That wouldn't have been problematic. It'd been almost as problematic as our early makeup tests. Thank goodness that someone came into the studio and said, maybe not this look, maybe not. Okay, so go on, James, you can lead the assault.
I was just going to add a little tidbit. It's not really a fact.
Is it real? Is it real?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of retcon fantasy. So,
the quarks were in it. Are you going to tell us the quarks were in it?
Retcon fantasy is what Jason does in the Bay.
So it was suggested that the different voices, and this was Jonathan Morris, suggested that the different voices in the computer were pre-Hartnell Doctors.
Well, from Brad?
No. On Twitter, it was suggested that that's what it was.
Jonathan Morris from Bread suggested that. I didn't know he was that big a fan. Anyway,
just a little bit of, cheeky thing. So that's it from me.
Are we having a score by any chance?
I was waiting for
sorry,
behind the scenes fact.
Okay. Well,
and I got an anecdote about someone from Bread.
Mrs. Boswell will be a pre-Hartnell Doctor at this rate, the way we're going.
Gene Bow will be scoring before he does.
I scored this a middle of the road, genuinely middle of the road, 5.
5. 5 et quels sont les résultats de la jury, Jason?
Thank you very much. So, this.
I'm trying to work out what you just said.
I don't know. I don't know what he said. He's speaking in tongue. Okay, so it's not the best story of the season. And I think you can tell by the fact that we've talked more about Leela than we have the story quite where we're feeling on this one. It was, you know, every script has got its problems. This one, perhaps a little bit more than others. Some iconic bits in this. Obviously, we get a companion introduction, but that in itself does not make a story. So I am actually completely with James on this one, and I am entirely down the middle of the road this time, and I am in fact on a 5 also.
Marvelous. Well, as I'm on the crest of a feminist wave myself here, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm almost entirely apathetic towards this story. I'm going to award it 1 extra point than I gave The Deadly Assassin, just for the fact it's not The Deadly Assassin. But for me, it's a story that as it rolls on screen, I am deleting it. I am beat, delete. I just cannot be bothered to remember the blandness that is happening before my eyes. So Doctor Who and the Face of Evil is a 2.
Oh.
I said this season has the big Nana's Knickers sag in the middle. And this is the sag, so stick with me. I've got nicer things to say coming forward, but
no more saggy knickers.
No more saggy knickers. It's the full Spanx now.
Oh, hello.
So Face of Evil ends on a less than glorious 12. Anyway, moving on our positive and upbeat review of this season, we are heading towards the Robots of Death.
Yay!
And I'm joined by a D class, because I get along with D classes. What do you think, Jason?
I'm not saying anything.
He left you hanging there, didn't he?
He did. That's because he hasn't got a voice.
Well, I haven't. You're quite right. No, because I'm a D class.
I heard a cry.
So we are in Agatha Christie in space. I'm just going to start this one. So, Agatha Christie in space.
Jason had pre-scripted an intro and you've just totally ruined it for him.
I know. Sorry, Jason.
That's fine. James, carry on. I'm perfectly fine with that.
So we've got lots of sort of murders taking place on this the sandminer, which is inspired by the novel of June, so from 1965. So there's lots of influences, lots of things here, nods to other things. I mean, just imagine sort of a Midsummer Murders, but taking place on a big craft going across the planet. You've got the general gist. There's loads of bodies piling up everywhere, and you've got this mystery as to who is behind it. And these robots.
Hang on. The mystery is kind of ruined by the fact it's called Doctor Who and the Robots of Death, I think.
Yeah, but there are little clues as to who the actual real villain of the piece is, because obviously there is, you know, the robots themselves, and you've got the 3 classes of the robots, like you say, some that don't speak. You've got the dumbs, if you like, the black ones. You've got the green ones, and then you've got the silver super Voc. So yeah, and it's who's behind it, who is programming these robots into rebelling and killing people.
I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of people do deride it for going, oh, it's really obvious because you can hear David Bailey giving the orders. But when I was a little lad watching this for the first time, I didn't twig who it was behind it.
You see his shoes as well. You see the bottom of his shoes.
And his shoes, though.
So there's sort of clues in there. But no, I didn't get it either. When you're watching this first time as a youngster, you're just more sort of concerned about these robots killing everyone.
Now, this hadn't struck me. This is my plot worry of the day here. This hadn't struck. I've been watching this now for about 20 years or something, and it hit me quite hard the other day. This thing did. is that, can you clarify for me here now, right? Taran Capel is giving them all the bike discs to go out and kill. So he's like, go and kill so-and-so, and off they go and kill so-and-so, off they go, right? So kills Rob Edwards. He's the first one we see on screen getting killed. But when Doctor Who comes to explain to David Collins, it must have been a robot, he does it on the basis that Rob Edwards can't get the pack out. He's like, if you couldn't get the pack out, what would you do? He's like, call a robot. Now that implies that the robot has done an opportunistic killing, and he's responded to him being called in at that moment, as opposed to being given a disc to go and kill him, as he does all the other killings that are all, you've been sent to go and kill so-and-so. Discuss. You have seen this, haven't you?
Yeah.
Just checking. Well, it worried me the other day because clearly he'd said, go and kill old posh boy. And off he'd gone. He hadn't waited for him to not be able to pull out his air balloon pack, had he? But that's how the Doctor persuades David Collins that that's why the killer must be a robot.
Yeah. Well,
okay, well, it's too late to call Robert Holmes up on this and say, dude, what were you thinking? That doesn't make sense. But for the rest of it, I'm happy with his plotting.
It is a good story, this one. I'm going to come in and just have a few things to say about it myself. I think the design of this one is really good, and I love the design of the robots themselves. You're right. I think obviously it does give it a little bit away in the title, but I can forgive this. It's one of the very earliest VHS releases, so this is a well-watched story. Although I must admit I haven't quite picked up on some of the same things, but. It's been watched over the years. I probably watched it a little too often, but it's a nice script. The tension builds really nicely throughout. The gothic approach is really, really, really strong in this one. I love that. As I said, I love the design. It's studio bound, but isn't affected by being studio bound. It's a good four-parter. I think Gregory Dupalmay's performance as D84 is it's a good one. It's a good performance, that. So yeah, I love the Robots of Death. I think it's definitely a sharp improvement over the previous story, and again, just underlines a good pace in this season.
It strikes me, Jason, that watching the omnibus VHS with the new titles, you must have loved the fonts on that.
I have loved them that much. I blotted it out of my memory.
I'm sure that's really. They have a red Arial font or something for the credits or something.
It did. It was awful.
Yeah,
it was awful. It was all wrong, completely wrong.
Space feature movie, space feature length space movie or something. That's what they used to describe them, wasn't it?
Dear Lord. I mean, the Seeds of Death down to 60 minutes on the original release was just a shocker in itself. I remember getting it bought and we took it back because I was gutted it was 60 minutes. The omnibus type releases of the VHSs weren't the best, and this is another good example, I think, that didn't work. But they soon brought it out episodically, and we've had it a number of times. Probably one of the more bought stories I've got in my collection, actually, over the various releases we've had.
Yeah, I was at the convention when they launched the DVD. I remember it fondly. That's a good anecdote for you all. I got mine signed by Tom Baker. He didn't sign that day, but my friend went and got his autograph and photo for me. Breaking the rules back then, breaking the rules. The other thing, the robots, the design of them is gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. It's sort of echoed, isn't it, later when they Voyage of the Damned. It's a shame that we don't get the Vox back at any point because it's an iconic look. But also the heartbeat, the music heartbeat is good, and the feet and I mean, if you were being unkind, you'd say, okay, foil on the feet and marigold gloves, but sort of James's cosplays, but not on these calls, but on other calls.
But holidays.
Holidays. But it is beautiful, and it's beautifully realised, and I think Michael directs really well. He's got an appetite to do new things, like the bit where you go onto the deck, don't you, through the model and all that sort of stuff. That's all really nice. And Greg Bonnet, as you say, does manage to give a sort of human performance as a robot while still being a robot. You do feel sad when D84 dies at the end. I mean, he's a robot, but he's Miles as well as SC7. He's incredibly creepy. Does a good turn. Miles married to a 9-mon. That's your fact for the day. Getting there before Stato does.
Well, I was going to say, definitely. You've spoiled one of James's there.
But also, I mean, we've got a multiracial crew, which is, it's a nice sort of forward-thinking move, and it's impressive that actually that's something that's been considered with the casting.
It's a good, strong guest cast, I think, in this one as well. Again, like all good murder mysteries, you need a good cast to carry the story along, and I think they definitely struck it lucky with a lot of the casting in this one.
Tanya Rogers is bloody terrible, though, isn't she? I mean, the Vox do us a favour, don't they? They do. I'm, you did it, Ivanov. Okay. I think there's a bit of relief when you get kill Zilda. Yes. Come on, I'll do it. But great. Everyone else. I mean, David Collins. I mean, he does the good transition and that's one of the most grimmest parts of this story, because now, having berated Deadly Assassin for its violence and unhappiness, the moment where you see the Vok hand with the bits of entrails hanging off them, it's not just blood. There is a bit of sort of brain or something that's hanging off that because I think the inference is that Borg has fought back and ended up getting a bit mashed up doing it. But yeah, you see the Kensington gore hanging off the robot's hand, and that's what sends David cool mad. But David Collins, although he never remembered these stories at all, he would never actually recall any of it, because he always said he was doing more important things. But he does such a great performance, so you wouldn't tell that he's not wholeheartedly into that. So other guest, Brian Croucher as well. Nicely done.
Yeah.
I think it's a little sad that Brian goes a bit too soon, really, because he's got an attack for it. Very outspoken on the Phantom Films Who Talk commentary. If you'd like to hear his stories about Doctor Who and things that they smoked whilst recording, it's all out there, folks. Oh yeah, we don't censor it. I mean, obviously, I don't have favourites in this world, but I absolutely adore Pam, and so it's lovely to see Pam looking amazing and being amazing in this. So that's me being sycophantic.
Oh, but she does.
It's good.
She's really good in this, and she does look really sharp in this as well.
I do recall, and I'll just go into a little anecdote again. It doesn't like an anecdote.
I like it when you give one of your anecdotes. If we ain't got a stat, we've always got an anecdote to fall back on.
Have a convention anecdote, and this was actually the first signing event I did with Pam. I sat with her. I wasn't in my ivory tower. I sat with Pam, and someone came to select one of the photos in front of her, and they looked along the different ones, and apologies if you're out here watching this, and I'm now telling the story, but anyway, I love you anyway. He picked out the photo, and he said, "I'll have that one, please, because you can see the strangle marks." That was nice. That was a moment we shared.
Did they say, could you sign, and could you say you were strangled by?
Yeah, I just like to think they got home and I was like signed with love. Strangle marks.
The strangle marks.
Yeah, I mean it goes along at a cracking pace. The story does. Yeah. I mean, the ending in some ways feels a little odd, not unusual, but just that there just seems that sort of jump from the moment where they're in the cupboard and you let the mouse out to the sort of TARDIS table. It just feels like there's sort of a scene missing somehow. I can't quite quantify it, but it feels like it's just ended.
It's a neat conclusion, using the helium to disguise his voice, so he ends up being killed by his own robots. I think that's got a nice tie up. But I think you're right. The it just seems to then go, right, we're done here now, let's go.
I mean, it's not correct for me to say these things now, so I'll speed through this, but Taran Capel, when he's in his full glory, always reminded me of Gary Glitter in the Heinz soup adverts. Yeah, I'm getting nods from the others. I'm not on my own here.
No, I am nodding because I will agree entirely with you. Yes.
So it's, but you know, least said, soon as mended.
But I think you're right about the pace in this story. Michael Bryant's direction is always sharp. Anyway, I don't think there's many that he's worked on that I think I could criticize. And I think he does take the story along at a good pace. It's always the thing with the whodunit, isn't it? When you don't quite, obviously you've got to take 4. If it had gone over 6 episodes, it would have been way too long and it wouldn't have worked. I think these whodunits always work better when you're in the sort of shorter format stories such as this. But there's enough going on in each episode. There's not a lot of repetition in this story. It sort of goes along, and slowly but surely they're getting picked off one at a time. So, there's not a lot to dislike about this story, in my opinion.
The list of suspects is getting shorter and shorter every scene, so you're kind of like, oh, okay, that's
maybe you've got it, partway through the story because the voice, you're gonna pick up the cues at some stage, but there isn't a lot, as I said, isn't a lot to dislike about this one.
Yeah, poor Carol, we don't even get to see him, do we? Just in the hopper, looking a bit cold. I'd say on the Michael E. Bryan thing, it's actually. People always talk about Douglas Camfield or Graham Harper. There are certain directors that people always say, oh, they were the. I honestly think he's so hugely underrated for the serials he did and the way he did them. There's a lot of very impressive work he did. I mean, I think he probably deserves a bit more praise than he gets in a lot of circles.
There was I read somewhere that Tom disagreed with the cliffhanger to part 1, I think it was. But Michael E. Bryant said, no, we are sticking with it. And he said that Graham Williams was coming down to watch it being filmed, so there was going to be no change to it.
Part 2 is one of my favourite cliffhangers. I know I've got cliffhanger number wrong. Part 2, when the robot's counting down and then Pam's screaming out, she's coming. I love that. That's such a good cliffhanger. Love the robots there. I could watch the robots to death again. I mean, I watched it 2 days ago. I could watch it again. Probably not when we finish this at 2:00 in the morning. I could watch it again tomorrow. It's always one that I would happily watch. And there's some nice little character bits as well. Equally, because we're talking about Leela, and there's the little bits where she works things out. The robots don't need sofas because they have no feelings. And that's the educational thing. And there's the nice little interplay where she's got instinct and intuition that the doctor doesn't agree with. And she's like, something bad's about to happen. He's like, no, it's not. And then it does. And he's like, don't say you told. There's a lot of that. And obviously she learns that, the knife thing isn't going to help, The hilarious thing, I suppose, is that bit where Ivanov slaps her and she kicks him in the ghoulies and says, you do that again and I'll cripple you. That's an incredible line, isn't it? I mean, I know we said that, but Sarah Jane wouldn't have ever said, you do that again and I'll cripple you. I mean, as companions go, that's quite an assertive statement, maybe.
Yeah. There was an anecdote that she said that there was a point where she was due to throw a knife, but accidentally it slipped out of her hand and almost hit a cameraman. So they had to blunt everything so that she couldn't injure anyone.
Did you get that on the anecdote bingo card?
I did, yeah.
You can have that and Crest of the Feminist Wave. And anyway, we'll move on.
Actually, the anecdote bingo card could become a thing. I like this.
they used to do it at conventions with John Pertwee. He used to get the toothless tiger, the jet ski. It was a genuine thing. I think it's maybe that Saturday night at Utopia we could do anecdote bingo.
Oh yes.
Oh yes, all over this. I love the idea of this.
No, we won't. Okay. Keep it friendly. Keep it friendly. Any mother got no practice now already. Any other exciting thoughts on the robots of death? I'm surprised James hasn't got one of the hats on. I thought you could have at least had a Tooth hat.
No, I'm sticking with my
Actually, why aren't you doing the full David Bailey, Will Be Glorious, Silver, and where's that? Where's your face paints?
Oh, he's gone all in. He's all in here. There's only one story in his eyes. He's all in on it.
There is.
The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yeah.
Okay, do we have any thoughts remaining on Doctor Who and the Robots of Death?
I think we've covered everything.
No, I think I'm happy to go to a score.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go on then, Jason.
Okay, so as I said,
lead us off.
Very likable story, this one. Not an awful lot to call wrong in it. I think there's great direction. There's some great supporting cast. I love a good whodunit, and it's particularly a good whodunit where there's no escape because it's the ravages of the sand outside. So slowly but surely, one by one, they're all getting killed off. On the basis that I love this story, my score is going to come in a very, very healthy 8.5.
I thought you were going to say 7.5 then. I really did.
As if to be that contrary.
It's just on a loop tonight. 7.5. 7.5.
Dear viewer, you can't see the scowling that Jason's giving. It's like a 7.5.
Quick, we'll talk about Twin Dilemma next. 7.5.
The viewer knows I'm scowling behind the scenes.
I give Jason Scowl a 7.5.
Yeah. That's just the wrinkles you can see. Yeah,
it is 4 o'clock in the morning at this stage.
Time difference in Cardiff's quite something. James, where are you at on Doctor Who and the Robots of Death?
I like this story. Like you say, it's a whodunit in space. It doesn't outstay its welcome. It's pacey, it's fun, and I gave it an 8. That
was a very quick summation. I was expecting a little more there, a little more bang for my buck.
We've been recording for 6 hours. How much more do you want?
Gosh, well, I adore this story. I've got lots of nice things. Aside from my plot quibble that I posed that none of these old Marys could answer. So if anyone's got any theories on it, pop it below. I would watch this tomorrow. I love it all day long. I am giving Robots of Death another 10. I'm back on the 10s, man. We're back.
10. It's all 10s tonight.
I am.
What about 10s?
I'm being. This is like my Gemini season. I've got so much love for some of it, and so much dislike for others. It's like where are we at? But
this is
Robots of Death all day long is in my top 10 stories. I don't know the exact rankings. Please don't try and work it out from my scores. But if I were doing a top 10 stories, Robots of Death would always be in there.
It's a good black and white sort of evening for you, isn't it? You've gone as low as a 1, but you've been up at 10. And do you know what? I think that's a very good score for that story.
It's a very good score and a very deserved one. Which gives Doctor Who and the Sand Mine Murders 26.5.
We have a new leader, do we?
We
have
do.
a new leader. I don't know whether D84 and Hieronymus are going to have a little bit of a face-off on this now. He's not happy. He's not happy. It's all right. I haven't got a Deadly Assassin mask. Okay. We are now rapidly heading towards the series finale, which is the Talons of Weng-Chiang. I'm getting more dramatic. Jason's yawning and I'm getting more reactive.
So you did all that drama. Jason's there falling asleep.
Oh, bloody hell.
You better go first, Jason, otherwise we might not get your commentary.
He's mixing Nitol with the vodka now.
Oh no. Okay, so Talons of Weng-Chiang. So we have Victorian London. Again, I love a good historical story, and this is good historical setting here. We have the fabulous Jago and Lightfoot. We have a giant killer rat. Oh, and we've got some killer ventriloquist dummies as well. Oh, we've got one ventriloquist dummy. A solid season ending here for me. It's a beautifully written story by Robert Holmes. And I adore the nod to Sherlock Holmes dripping all the way through this story. James's cosplay is giving it away massively tonight. But you know what? This is the one time we don't see Tom in his traditional scarf costume. And I think it's all the better for it. It really sets the tone for what is a very dark story. And I've had the chance to watch several times over the years. Saw it on the big screen at the BFI a couple of years back. I rewatched it again for this, and I've used the special features version because I do like the new effects that they've added in. I think they're quite sympathetic to the story. It's sad that it's Philip's last story on Doctor Who. I think he, in the seasons that he was involved in Doctor Who, I think he brought some great stories to realization. All a fantastic guest cast in this one as well. I'm going to leave it there because I want to give the guys an opportunity to say some things, but I absolutely love Talons of Weng-Chiang.
I thought James was going to go for it then because he's all cosplayed up and ready to roll. And then it just looked like we're leaving Clifford hanging. James, I presume, unless this is going to be the biggest U-turn here, that you enjoy the Talons of Weng-Chiang.
Now, I need to say up front that yes, I do enjoy this story, and there's a lot I love about this story, but it is one of those stories where you mentioned this when we were talking about one of the other stories about it was very much of its time, and it's become now one of those stories where you watch it and you're like, okay, there are things that if this was being made today, well, it wouldn't be made today. You know, there are elements of it that would be different. The story in itself, I do love. I love, as Jason has said, you've got the whole Sherlock Holmes aspect to it, which is given a nod by Tom's costume. There's also elements of Phantom of the Opera. So you've got, Magnus Greel has got this sort of half fate sort of like half melted face, and he wears a mask and he's hiding in this theatre. So there are lots of elements that I love that are influenced by other stories, other sort of mediums. I find the John Bennett portrayal now, I don't know, slightly off, not enough to ruin the story. I wouldn't not watch the story because I love the story, but there is an element now that it kind of reminds me of Peter Ustinov in One of Our Dinosaurs Is Missing, where it does, and it's better, but it's one of those things. It was very sort of, like you say, of its time, that they couldn't cast someone, so they've got him to do it. And you may disagree with that, and I can see you shaking your head, but that's
I'm going to have to disagree because I don't. If he were doing a comic performance, if you were taking the piss and doing it for comic effect, I would find that offensive. I think he actually does a very subtle and very witty and quite spicy performance. I think he does a remarkable job. I know a lot of people find it easy now to just condemn Weng-Chiang. It's interesting, and it's only been recently, I think it's very recently, that people have started to outright just say this is wrong. And you can enter into a million debates on how things are made, how things are appropriated, how you feel about them. And I if you find it offensive, then that is your absolute right to find it offensive, and therefore to not watch it. But the intention when this was made wasn't a nasty,
no,
and his performance isn't a comic performance. He isn't taking the piss out of being a Chinese person. He is portraying it with absolute conviction. And the makeup there, it's unfortunate because you wouldn't do it now. I mean, yes, things. I mean, as recent as like Come Fly With Me, people, you know, Matt Lucas and people were doing Chinese makeup and things like that. That was for comic effect. And I get that this is a drama, and I 100% stand by the fact that his performance in this is a very skilled performance, and I don't think the intent there at any point is bad.
I don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that just because of that I can't watch this story or anything else like that, because I do enjoy this story. It's not like others that we've reviewed this season that I don't really want to watch again. Again, there is language that is used by pretty much every single character that, again, you wouldn't get through now. But again, you know, I say it is of its time, and some of the things that, you know, some of the comments, some of the slang that's used, you wouldn't necessarily, you know, at the time it would have been perfectly acceptable to say.
What slang and comments is? I'm always at pains with people sort of, because there's a moment where the doctor is in the police and he's like, I recognize you from somewhere, and he says, oh well, I understand we all look the same to you, which isn't a racist. He's saying to you all Chinese people look the same. That's like the reverse of it. He's calling someone out for implicit racism, surely. I don't that's one that people often say.
So there's points where Jago and Lightfoot both use comments around, you know, the Chinese, they call them chings or chinks. There's a yellow face reference in there as well. So there are certain slang words that of the time wouldn't have been offensive.
But it's set in Victorian London by the same token. So when you have Rosa in the recent series, there were people in contemporary America using terminology that we wouldn't use now, because that's part of the culture. I'm not having a go at you here. I'm just saying that it's an interesting. It's not even in 1977 was it claiming to be a modern look at. It's set in the Victorian era. I mean, we on a sort of vague divert here watched one of those terrible 70s porn sort of light films, like Adventures of, and the guy came home and he backslapped his wife, just quite, he smacked her, and it was horrendous, violent action. And you think that's an acceptable thing of that era. Things are sort of a Victorian perspective on things, even a 70s perspective of a Victorian perspective is going to be different. You wouldn't approach this story in this manner now. You wouldn't approach most of Classic Who. I think you'd struggle to find many Classic Who's that you'd approach in this way now. I mean, even within the run of new series Who, I don't think a lot of the stuff Jodie's doing, they would be doing the stuff that they did, you know, early with, you know, Christopher and David. I think things are progressively moving on all the time. People have always got different reactions to things. I mean, there was a worry that people said, oh, you shouldn't be able to watch Enemy of the World because pet trout and salamanders are questionable situations. It's like, but it's all wrapped up within context of when it was made and intent. And I think intent, for me, intent is about 95% of this. If I honestly believe that the situation with Weng-Chiang was to go out and make 6 weeks of racist entertainment, I don't think it would have happened. I don't think anyone on this production team was stupid enough to want to make a racist program. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
I watch this for its storytelling. I watch this for its visuals. I watch this for, because actually it's probably one of Tom's best stories. And I can actually, I'm going to sit on the side here that it is of its time. And okay, watching it at the BFI a couple of years back, yes, of course, there was some comments and some tittering in the audience and various other things. But it does not take away from what I think is a very strong narrative in this story. Right from the get, it's a 6-part. Normally we're sitting here going, oh, saggy 6 parts, we're not very happy with these. It does not stop from the moment it starts to the moment it finishes. It doesn't dip at all for me. There's always something new and something different happening. Yes, there's questionable terminology, and the decision at the time that the decision they took at the time on the casting, that to me does not distract away. I think that the original giant rat probably distracts me far more than, in fact, the sort of referencing that you're referring to, because again, I'm watching a piece of television of its time. We live in a culture now where it's very, very easy to erase our past. I think obviously there are things that we absolutely need to erase and take out, because there's some really, there's some things that we should do. When we're talking about a piece of culture, our culture from, if you look at a piece of TV from the 50s, you look at a piece of TV from the 60s, the one that always gets debated ad infinitum on the missing episodes forums is, if they ever release the Celestial Toymaker, would they leave the song in there? It distracts away from the narrative, and it's an unnecessary distraction. And I think we should be allowed as a culture to sit there and watch some of what we've grown up with. I would happily go back and revisit some stuff. There's some stuff I would happily not go back and revisit. And, that everyone should have the personal choice to be able to do that or not do that. So for me, I'm not as offended by it. And I'm not
saying I'm offended, by the way. This is I'm saying this for a discussion point.
Absolutely. And we are discussing
I'm cancelling this story.
No. We are discussing it, and I think that's a good thing. So I'll take Talons in its storytelling. I'll read the novel. I'll watch it. I'll watch it ever many times I need to watch it. It's a bloody good story, and I really enjoy it. But the referencing I'm making just says it goes back to the fact that I get the reasons for cancel culture at some points, but at others, I think we're too quick as a society now to cancel our history. I think we've got to look back and take the good and the bad in our history at times.
Nobody ever wants to cancel the Wheel in Space. Peter Laird plays Chang in that. He's definitely not Chinese, has to be said. Well, yeah, I think it's something that's become. It's interesting because I say growing up with the story. People always loved it. It was always a classic. It was always top of the polls. It was always something that people loved, and it was always Weng-Chiang all-time classic. And it is only recently that people have now said, no, it's not right. It's not right. Take from that view. If you are upset and offended by Talons of Weng-Chiang, then I'm sorry that you take that. I don't take anything away from anyone's right to an opinion on it. I just think that context and intent are very important. So to me, I just think it's a very good story. It's very well written. It's very well performed. I think our big stars in this one, to take it onto a positive note, our big stars here are Benjamin and Baxter, who are amazing. And it's quite funny because when we did a commentary for this story, we had the two gents in, and it isn't until episode 4
that they're on screen.
They're on screen together.
Yeah,
it takes ages. And just on that sort of note, actually, just before we come back to Benjamin Baxter, we said about it not sagging as a 6-parter, and that's Philip's very clever sort of 2 and a 4 or 4 and a 2, which he worked with season 2. You get the inverse. So you sort of have a 4-parter with the theatre, and then it goes off for a 2-parter, with the dragons, House of the Dragon, or whatever. So it's a very conscious. Actually, the end of that 4th episode, it feels like it could be the end of this story, and it's going to go into another one. And that's a very clever way of not having those episodes 3 and 4 where you're like, can we have something happening now? But Benjamin and Baxter, spectacular. Absolute pair of them are incredible.
Yeah, They are. And you know, quite rightly, they got their own spin-off from this because they're great characters. They provide. I mean, there's a wonderful scene where Leela's sat down eating, and she's got no idea. She just like picks up the whole bowl of like trifle or whatever and starts drinking from it. And he's there going, do you want a fork? Do you want a spoon? There's these lovely moments. You know, when they're separately with the Doctor or they're with Leela, they really add something to it. And every scene they're in, they stand out. You know, even against Tom, who has a habit of stealing some scenes. You know, they really do stand their ground, and it's great when you get to see them together. You know, very different background. One's like the theatre guy. The other one is he's like a surgeon or a pathologist or something. He's looking at, you know, doing the autopsies and things. So you've got the two very different backgrounds, but the two characters work really well together. You know, when they're climbing in the dumbwaiter to escape, it's so wonderfully sort of British. It's like, oh, you know, will it hold my weight? Is this rope all right? It's just really, you know, they're really good characters.
But it goes.
Well, I will say the dumbwaiter thing is the cheekiest bit of padding in the whole story. They escape, go in the dumbwaiter, step out for a few minutes, get recaptured. Oh, we're back. It's like nothing moved on there, did it?
But I think it goes to show the strength of this script, because those two characters were so well written that we've been able to enjoy the characterization of Jago and Lightfoot after the event. And there are very few people, if you think about it, in the history of who make the impact that they do. And you know, you've got Chris Benjamin, and he's not chewing the scenery, but he is so large as life when he's doing this. He's playing it perfectly to the point where it's just not going over the top. And I really adore the performance that he gives in this. So it's credit back to the script, which is, again, you know, as I've said up throughout this piece for this story, it's such an intelligently written script for me, and it's multi-layer. And you know, to get those kind of characters, you know, in some respects, Tom always likes to steal the scenes, but you almost feel like he's giving them the space to have those characters, that characterizations in there, particularly when he's working with Lightfoot, you know, in some of the scenes. You can see it's playing really well. Tom's very happy to have these characters working alongside him. He's clearly enjoying the story. Leela gets some nice bits in this. You know, it's a good all-round story, and you cannot take it away from the fact that it's probably one of the best stories of Doctor Who history for me.
Even despite my question around John Bennett, I do like the character as well. You know, the character at the beginning is, you know, you think he's ahead of this triad of, you know, the Chinese assassins, and then there's the bit where he ends up in the sewer with the giant rat, but then he gets kind of a redeeming bit later on as well. You know, like you say, there is really good characterization throughout this story. That makes you stop and think about the characters rather than just go, oh, well, that's a 2D villain that, you know, that we've picked up. There's a lot to like about it.
What I'm going to point out here, dear viewer, is that Phantom were actually the people that reunited Jago and Lightfoot. We did an event 2008 called Hinchcliffe Horror, about our 4th ever convention, and they hadn't been back together as since. So were it not for Phantoms reuniting there, would we even have had the spin-off question?
Yeah. They did quite a few, didn't they? They did quite a few of the seasons of Jago and Lightfoot.
I think you meant Phantom events. They did quite a few Phantom events as well.
They were definitely friends of the Phantom events.
They were always great. They were always immeasurably hilarious from the off. And it's quite heartbreaking, actually, the first time we did one with Chris afterwards, because like, oh, he sort of lost his psychic here. there's lots of beautiful bits of dialogue. The one which I really loved the other day was when the Doctor and Lightfoot are on the boat, and he says, "Just wait around for me. I'll just wait around for you here." He says, "Okay. Well, if I'm still in here after high tide," he goes, "Yes, don't bother." That sort of stuff. I love that. I love that kind of play on things. I mean, Robert, bless him, he does reuse Magnus Greel as Shara's Jack, I think, a little bit there for Case. I think the reveal as well, you get the same thing of the deformity and
wasn't there some suggestion that it was actually going to be the Master?
Master. That was originally the story was going to be the Master was using the life force to try and regenerate.
Not the Hood.
No. No. A couple of bits from me, because I do like my stats. The conductor in the Palace Theatre was actually Dudley Simpson, getting a little bit of a cameo there. It was the first story that John Nathan Turner worked on.
Oh, he worked on Space Pirates.
Did he?
Yeah, he's a floor manager.
Oh, okay. It was the second story that he worked on.
No, I think he did a couple of poetries in between as well.
Well then,
but I think we could keep moving on with that one.
All right then. John Nathan Turner worked on this one. There's loads of
James. The viewer will never have noticed.
We'll cut that bit. We'll cut that bit. It'll be smooth.
Won't even see it.
There was loads of Sherlock Holmes references, even Lightfoot saying that his housekeeper was Mrs. Hudson. The giant rat is a nod to the giant rat of Sumatra, which is mentioned in The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire. So yeah, lots of little nods and things like that, which are very good.
I don't mind the giant rat, and I'm also always at pains to say that the television back then would have been, now we've all got 600-inch televisions with crystal backlight and everything. It's like, whoa, look at the scenery on this. But I was like, it would have been that small, that dark, and sort of a bit further back in the room because it wouldn't have just been your back wall. So I'm always thinking, actually, we're probably slightly unkind on the giant rat. John Bloomfield, I'll give the shout out to. I mean, he's won awards, darlings, but I'm willing to shout out here and say he does an incredible job on all the costuming as he does.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree entirely. Authentic throughout. And again, I've said it before that, the BBC and particularly Doctor Who are very good at putting these kind of period type stories together and giving them that sort of costume look and feel that they really need.
And we haven't mentioned Mr. Sin. Mr. Sin, the creepy, murderous doll, is again another iconic image.
Blood is trickling down the hand, and he goes and finds it in the box, and he's like, "Oh, it was bleeding."
And he starts snorting at the end as he gets all piggy, doesn't he? It's gruesome. Again, it's a violent thing that he has the knife in his neck as well, and he bats the knife away. And there are certain things you just never get away with. As in a kids show, family entertainment now, and I think it's interesting, but I mean it's quite brutal and it's quite gruesome. I mean, people are being eaten alive by rats and mutilated and knifed, and there's a lot of axe throwing and all. I mean, I should imagine in Australia it's probably about half the running length. There must be lots of chops where someone goes to get axed or something. But it just looks glorious, and it's just so engaging. I mean,
and I love the bit when he gets the Doctor up on stage and he goes to put him in the cabinet, and they spin the cabinet around, and the Doctor walks out the other side. There's lots of little comedy moments like that, which are just Tom's so
on
good.
Top form, isn't he? Tommy's firing on all cylinders here. Absolutely top form, and he's reacting, and you can tell when he likes, and like we said about Benjamin and Baxter, you can tell when he's respectful of his guest cast because he ups with them. If he's not, he'll go into his own little zone, but when he's there with them, he knows actually I'm happy with this. I'm on a level, and I'm getting what I want back, and the reaction, and it just works.
And a shout out to David Maloney. This was his last Doctor Who contribution, but again, another director, I think, who, whenever working on the show, because we said this about Michael in the previous story, but whenever David's worked on Doctor Who throughout his time, again, I think the sort of delivery of his visualization and understanding of the technique of making good drama for television comes across, I think, time and again.
So, drum rolls. I can hear the Muffin Man calling, actually. I think it's time. Are we going to go for a scores on the doors from Doctor Who and The Foe from the Future?
Ooh, that wasn't the Master.
Wasn't the Master. Well, I'll kick off. Literally, I'm going to kick off.
Oh, oh.
I'm knocking the set around now. You know what? I adore this story. It is one of my favorites. See, Jason's giving everything 7.5 tonight. I'm like the supercharged version. You're either getting out or you're getting everything. And I'm giving Weng-Chiang everything. I think it's still a 10 for me. It's 10 points for Weng-Chiang.
And do you know what? That's a very well-deserved 10 points. I'll go next because I'd like James to take the last call on this one. So, you know what? I'm actually going to break with tradition here. I think I've been quite obvious throughout this story, the way that I've talked about it, that I've got a very big love for this. This story has been there throughout my sort of Who fandom, and I absolutely adore it. So it ain't no surprise. We're going again. It's a 10.
What happened to 7.5, Jason? You broke.
Yeah.
I did say that the first half of the season was quite moderate, but we've had some lows and some highs here. It's that 10 time.
Okay, James.
Oh, I can't believe it's come down to me.
No, there's only 3 of us here. I know there's Rusty and there's an old Vok or a super Vok or a Dumb behind me, but it's only us 3, really. Less Mr. Sins on the floor.
Despite my earlier discussion, which I felt needed to be had, because but exactly that. You can't see what Paul's doing, but I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I think these things need to be discussed, and I think they need to be talked about rationally. And I think you're right. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and people will have their opinion. And I did see a lot of people slating this story in particular. Even when they started saying they were going to be releasing the Blu-ray box, there were people putting, comments online about this particular story. I'm sure BritBox did a thing around, like one of their little warnings at the very beginning of the story about, if you find it offensive. I think these things have to be discussed. I think they also need to be looked at in the perspective. Talons is a great story, and I do have a lot of love for it and all the references that come with it. It's not that the portrayal is what lets it down at all. So I did give it a 9.
The silence reigns. Okay. So, do we think over? Well, I just say, I think overall as a season, do we think it holds together, or do you think it? I think we've had a sort of highs and lows. Do you think it's a consistent season, or do you think it is very much? There are a couple of very good stories and some not so good stories.
I think there's a couple of really good stories, and there's some that just we know what our scores were for Deadly Assassin, but you could take that out of the season because it doesn't add anything apart from a whole load of mythology.
It's not one of the weakest seasons by any stretch. I do personally, I think it got off to quite a reasonably good start. You know, the first three stories, whilst they weren't classics, they weren't the worst stories I've ever watched, and they were good, you know, good Doctor Who. The Face of Evil, not at its best. I've got the Mask of Mandragora looking at me down the other side. So if I look distracted, I have the Mask of Mandragora waving at me. I do wish, viewer, you could see what I can see at times. You know, but it definitely hots up as we head towards the back end of the season. I think Philip can be very, very proud. Philip Hinchcliffe can be very, very proud of his contribution to Who history. And the 3 seasons that he essentially presided over, for me, are amongst some of the best seasons of Doctor Who that we've been able to watch as fans over the years.
When he nails it, it's brilliant. Honestly, yeah. When he, you know,
and like all contributors to the series, nobody gets it right 100% of the time. You're not going to get 18 karat gold classics, you know, story after story, season after season. So all seasons will have an ebb and a flow. Different producers bring their own marks to Doctor Who, and I think that's got to be one of the positives about the longevity of the series that we watch. But this season, it's not got low lows. To you guys, I think it does have some low lows, and you could take some of the stories out. I'm not in that camp. I think it's a moderate season. It dips, but it comes back with a strength at the end. And I think for me, it's interesting, you know, when we do come to review the forthcoming seasons that follow this, I think you'll understand some of my comments when we get to that as to why I'm a big fan of this particular era of the show's history.
Wait till we get to season 17, folks. Just wait.
Oh, I can barely wait myself.
Okay, so final scores on my poor old twitchy eye is just about making it through this. Look, literally, poor old thing. Maybe I was talking about it before we started recording. Anyway, 6th place on our season 14. It's The Deadly Assassin on 10.5.
That's why his eye was twitching.
And never did I think, in all honesty, that we'd be coming out of the review of season 14 with The Deadly Assassin sitting plumb bottom of our list of scores today. So it does go to show that we all have different likes and dislikes in this series, and I think that's what makes our fandom quite unique, realistically.
I'm giving a 7.5 to that summation. Fifth place, it's The Face of Evil on 12 points. 4th place is The Hand of Fear on 22 points. Third place, oh, he's back. Get the money out the prop. Get the money out the prop. 3rd place on 25.5 is Mask of Mandragora.
That would have been enough to win quite a few of our season reviews so far.
I think against season 18, that would have probably been more than a couple of stories combined. Second place, so our runner-up, it's Mr. Volk, Robots to Death on 26.5, which means our winner, with no Piper Poppy, it is the Talons of Weng-Chiang on 29.
Yay! Well deserved win there, and I think the top 3 stories there at the end place well. I think they deserve to be there.
I can all shake that wood. Iconic, quotable. Thank you very much for joining me again, James and Jason, and everyone who survived both parts of this. And we shall see you again soon. Hopefully less covered up.